The Dunning Africa Center. It's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation.
We shift our focus to the central theme of this month's webinar. Our distinguished panelists and hosts are drawn from across the world and work in business, academia, and government. Join us as we ask the pressing questions facing African business today.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another wonderful opportunity to talk with our wise panelists across the continent to discuss issues that matter, hopefully, to everybody. It is the first Thursday of every month, as you all know, and Dunning Center is a place where we have conversations that matter to everyone. So, without further ado, today's topic is about engaging women entrepreneurs within African agricultural supply chains. And, this is one of those topics that really matters. I mean, not that my other topics don't matter, but this really matters because, it's the lifeblood of the continent. Agriculture lies at the heart of Africa's subsistence, lies at the heart of the African economy. Traditionally speaking, Africa has been an agricultural continent. And no, nowadays, of course, it generates a lot of income. It's a source of income. Agricultural economies across Africa have prospered. And in fact, one of those things that we don't really appreciate when people start talking about oil and mining and so forth. But what they miss is something at the grassroots. Understanding. But why is Africa? If you look at, I'm going to come back to this, but in terms of contribution to the economy, it is much smaller than agriculture is much smaller than the number of people. That is to say, a very large proportion of African population is engaged in agriculture, but the share of the economy is about half that. And that's a rather important point, which I want to first emphasize. And the second thing, of course, within that discussion, where are the women in the story? And that's something that our panel are really wise people who are convinced across the continent to join us will now fill in on that topic. Without further ado, let me ask them to introduce themselves because, after all, I won't do justice to their very impressive and long CVs. And starting from my left-hand side, Frida, please say a few words about yourself.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Rajneesh, for having us here, Professor Rajneesh. My name is Frida Owinga. I'm tuning in from Nairobi. Actually, I'm in South Africa today, but I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm also a leadership and enterprise development professional. Happy to be here.
Thank you. And second, we have Vanessa Adams. Vanessa, mic is yours.
Great. Well, I am a diehard. When I say that, I wanted us to be able to talk about women entrepreneurs just for the reasons that you said, Professor, but because I've been in Africa working across different supply chains from farmers through to buyers internationally for more than 20 years. And despite all the work that's been done, all the data, all the analytics, women are still not getting a significant portion of that market share. And just like you said, the numbers are not panning out. So having spent time working in 30 different countries and with a myriad of different organizations, I'm happy to be engaging on this today. And hopefully we have a huge amount of questions and discussion and engagement, because we're far from solving what many people think is really an intractable problem, but I think is a fantastic opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. And Marie, I know that some of you may have seen the promotional material and were expecting Aaron, but in fact, we are going to have Marie, who I think is a worthy addition to the team. Marie.
Thank you, Professor, and good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. So my name is Marie Verrier. I'm the Development Director of the Global Share Alliance, so replacing Aaron Adwa, Managing Director for this event today. And just to introduce a bit who the Global Share Alliance is. So we are an industry association for shea. We're based in Accra, in Ghana, and we are member-based. We have about 840 members, all business and NGOs along the value chain, and the vast majority of our members are women enterprise, whether they are women cooperative or women SMEs. So that's why the topic today is really close to our heart.
Thank you. And I learned a lot by, I knew nothing about share except that how to buy it, and it's in my shaving cream, and it's in my hair products, and my partner uses that as well. I didn't know anything. I read so much, and I realized, what an important thing, and what an important industry for, especially for kind of at the smaller end of the value chain. And I think this is actually, Share introduces us to several of these challenges, which we'll come and talk to shortly. But let me not forget, last but definitely not least, Dr. Nugun Jelasan.
Thank you so much, Prof. I'm happy to be here. And my name is Nugun Jelasan. I am a senior lecturer at the Teesside University International Business School. I have worked across Africa, I will say. I've worked in parts of Southern Africa, in Zambia, in Western Africa, Ghana, and Nigeria, East of Africa, in Ethiopia. And by default, the kind of work I do sort of has to do with supporting women to break those barriers that affect women participation in supply chains. So I'm very happy to be here, and yeah.
Thank you so much, Nugun. So yeah, this is my team for the next 1.5 hours. And while we explore these issues, so what I want to do really is first of all talk about the generic issue of African agriculture and agricultural value chains. So one of the points that really strikes me, again, I'm the layperson in this team, is how small agriculture is, and to the extent that agriculture in Africa tends to be toward the commodity end of things. Rather than moving to higher value adding activities. So in general, there's a tendency for us to be focused on making commodities. And this has been a question that economists like myself have been asking. How does one move up the value chain? How does one move to add value to this? And this is something where, again, all the people on our panel have thought about and discussed. And why does that not happen, or why does not that happen more, and how are the experiences across different parts of the continent? So really, this is one of those issues. After we have that conversation, we move to the issue of women in this aspect, or specifically about the female participation issue. So, but let's start with that. Let me turn to Nogun first. Give us some idea of the numbers that we are looking at in terms of beyond just GDP and workforce, but what are some key numbers we need to know for those of us in our audience who don't know that much about it?
Thank you so much, Rajneesh. Certainly, agriculture is the backbone of the African economy. And it is predicted that about by 2030, I think the economy is going to grow by about $1 billion US. And interestingly, the question is, what constitutes that $1 billion US? Who are going to be the key participants in that economy? And about 200 million people in the continent are involved in agriculture, so to say, which contributes about 22 to about 34% of the continent's GDP, employing 60 to about 80%, I think, of the labor force, depending on which of the countries we want to look at precisely. And interestingly, it happens to be that key aspect of the economy that is pro-development, I will say. A very high growth potential in agriculture has the opportunity to take people out of poverty very quickly. So if there is any sector that needs to be given more attention in Africa, is agriculture because of such potential, I would say.
Thank you. And I think this is in fact where we learn quite a lot in this regard, that you know, how, because one of the issues, of course, that you know is rife not just in Africa but across the developing world is the issue of inequality, you know, and that it's about participation, but an unequal participation for unequal returns. What you know, there's a literature you know, in development studies about inequality of opportunities, and of course here we can highlight here that you know that people are participating in the economy, but they're not participating as fully as they should. And that is where you know the development challenges come, is understanding that for the amount of that they do, they're not fully appreciated, not fully integrated, and what are the reasons that hold them back, and not just, again, in general, why do firms not move upwards, or individuals or actors or farmers not move upwards towards greater value-adding activities, but also why women are left even further behind. And that's really, you know, kind of a two-pronged question, and I think they're both very much related. Frida, I think, you know, I'm sure you have something here to add.
Absolutely, Prof. One of the things that we've noticed at WeConnect, I support WeConnect as partnerships lead in Africa, that we connect women-owned businesses to corporate buyers. And we find that beyond producing, we want them to be processors. And when we train them and build their capacity to becoming processors, then they start doing bigger, better contracts with the corporate buyers. And then their life just changes, their income changes, and how they're viewed changes. They become more confident. So acknowledging that they're running a business and supporting them with innovative ideas of what they need to do and connecting them to the right to buyers makes a whole difference.
Yes. And yeah, and I think this is making that connection. Sometimes these are some of the challenges, that creating markets or establishing markets where things can be done. You know, what somebody once mentioned to me, that if we engaged you know, because women are by definition 50% of the population, with just simply by adding women more engaged, we will double you know, economic development immediately. Now, of course, this is the kind of the challenge that we have to face in this discussion. The undervalued contribution, I think, is one of the key words that comes up in this discussion. And I think Vanessa was mentioning to me about the lack of control over resources, and one of the challenges of this, Vanessa.
Sure. Yeah. There's layers of issues here which you've brought in, of course, and you're drawing us into a conversation which is quite complex. So let me come back to a few points which you just reiterated on. One is you asked the question about value addition, and Frida mentioned the question of confidence and training, but I also want to mention the issue of competitiveness. So one of the misunderstandings of agriculture in Africa, and Dr. Nugent mentioned about 60% to 70% of the population actually contributing to or being in part of the agricultural supply chains in general. In let's say at least half of African countries, agriculture is the most labor intensive, you know, and income generating for most of the population. But as the point that we know so well is not adding sufficient economic growth and economic value and even return on investment. And this is actually a fundamental issue the cost of agricultural production in Africa is actually much, much higher than in most countries, in India, in Brazil, in Argentina, in the US. The farmers, if you just look at the maize crop, are getting 3 to 5 to 6 times as much yield out of the same land area under cultivation. If you look at rice, sometimes it's 10 times the yield. If you're looking at soy, which is required for value addition, for example, in poultry or animal feed, now you're talking about soy yields which are under 2 tons a hectare. And in other countries like Argentina or Brazil, you're well over 10 tons a hectare. You're talking about a 5-fold differential, which is huge economic imparities and competitive inequalities and issues of competitiveness. Now you add on top of that land rights, ownership, you add on top of that access to credit and the high cost of credit, and then you add on top of that now cultural bias towards women being in the lead and owning value in their own rights. And so if you factor all that in as preconditions to this processing, value addition, and investment, I think your point starting out was if we could just double the economic powerhouse in Africa by having more inclusive mandatory engagement of women and giving them the tools to be contributing, imagine what the whole conversation would be. But that has to start at the most local rural levels and then all the way through to the export conditions and meeting international trade standards and requirements. Thanks.
Thank you. As usual, Vanessa, yeah, I learn something new every time we speak. Yes. So productivity. I mean, as an economist, these are words that obviously make me very excited. So the word improving productivity. How can we improve productivity? And this is actually a fundamental problem across Africa. I was just in the Netherlands last week, and driving or in the train, going past all of these greenhouses and wondering, how are we producing tomatoes in the Netherlands at a fraction of the cost of what you get them in Nigeria or in, and of course, answer is in part technology, productivity. One is able to use a small amount of space and apply a lot of money to buy the right kind of technology and a lot of management skills to create an industry. And we see that happening in some parts of Kenya and so forth, but largely speaking, there remains a productivity problem. I know Nogun has been trying to, in this regard, introducing the issue of productivity. So, productivity, machinery. I'm going to come to capital or the access to capital shortly, but this is one of the challenges: is really an unequal access to productivity improving techniques or methodologies or technology. What do you, Nogun? I know you have some thoughts on this.
Thank you so much. In terms of improving productivity, certainly I totally agree with Vanessa's point there. As much as we sort of read a lot of the numbers around the prospect for agriculture in hitting a sort of a $1 trillion economy, what aspect of agriculture are we talking about here? And then where can women be more productive in that supply chain? Certainly in terms of the primary sector where the production happens, so much reliance on rudimentary implements and equipment and what have you. I've worked with women in northern part of Nigeria where we supported women in terms of how they can produce more vegetable during the dry season through water collection in storage tanks and also farming behind their gardens. So that has also proven to be very efficient and effective in increasing first the income of these women and also increasing their ability to support the family's household food security and also income. Secondly, when we want to look at the demographics in terms of how women participate in the supply chain, the primary sector is one of those sectors where they can contribute. However, are we considering also the micro, the medium, and also large scale aspects where it has to do with processing of agricultural products? So again, we cannot limit women participation just to the primary sector alone, but how can we ensure that women have access to the resources that they need to participate in the higher value aspect of the supply chain as well?
This is actually the heart of the story here. And Marie, this is exactly what you people do in the Shea Alliance, from what I've read. So tell us how you get to support women to be more productive, add more value to their activities. Yeah. Tell us about about the organization and what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I will start just to zooming out on the shea industry, because it's a bit different industry. So the shea trees is a tree that grow naturally. It's not wild, but it's not planted either. It's usually preserved by farmers for its economic and benefits and its cultural significance. It's a very special value chain because it's only women who collect and process shea into shea kernel and then shea butter for use both in the food and in the cosmetic industry. You mentioned earlier how shea was used in cosmetic creams and lipsticks and so on, but actually most of the shea is used in the food industry. You will find it into all of your different chocolate products, margarine, pastry doughs, and so on. So at the GSA, we have 3 strategic priorities. Our first one is really about growing the market for shea, whether on local market, national, regional, international, as a way kind of to grow the size of the pie that women entrepreneurs, whether they are in the production part or whether they are in the value addition part, can benefit from it. And then we also work on quality as a way to improve competitiveness of shea. And finally, we work on sustainability, mostly women empowerment and protection of ecosystem. So back to women entrepreneurs, how do we support them? I would say we support them at 2 levels. So for all of the women who are engaged in primary processing, the way that we are supporting them is all about how to make sure that they can move up the supply chain and how we can make sure that they make more income for shea, especially if you consider that collecting and processing shea is very difficult and hard work. So the way we are approaching it is really by forming cooperative of women who can aggregate and produce large volume of shea so that they can get more market power and they have more negotiation power in the face compared to buyers. And what we have seen is just this move help women get about 50% more for their shea, compared if they would have sold it individually on the local market. And then from there, the cooperative can grow, it can expand into other products when shea is not off season, or taking additional shea processing. So going from shea kernel production, for example, to shea butter production, and then maybe some years down the line to cosmetic productions and so on. For the shea SME, the way that the Global Shea Alliance supports them is all about access to market, as Frida was commenting earlier on, as well as technical assistance. So we really support them on all of the different business aspects. So from the production process, how do you formulate good cosmetic product with shea? How do you make sure that you follow good standard operating processing, as well as from more the business sales type of thing? So how do you use social media? How do you use WhatsApp to sell your product? And then we do a lot of market linkages. So we support them to introduce them to buyers and distributors. We organize trade fairs. We participate to international events so that we multiply the opportunity and we support them as they grow. And one of the main difference of the Alliance, I think, is that we are there for the long term. So we are 15 years now. And so we are able to continuously, and because we are a member-based association, we are really able to continuously support our members and these women-led SMEs or cooperative in the different stage of growth, whether they are in their infancy or whether they are becoming very well-established businesses.
Interesting. This is, yeah, and one of the things that, again, I was Googling things and trying to get some information on this, on the general subject, and I kept coming up across the term female crops, which kind of amused me, but also annoyed me a lot. And this was when someone said about shea butter was a female crop, and I didn't understand this, but it seemed to be something specific to women. That women, on the one hand, do, again, stereotypical activities that they do, labor-intensive things in farming, like weeding, harvesting, and so on. But they also focus on food crops, which are, as Nugun was pointing out, the garden, kind of thing that you grow in your garden to sell in the market for a little extra cash, which is fine for subsistence. But the point I think the conversation we're coming to is, how does one move to the next step? How can it go beyond providing you a little bit of extra cash, so to speak, to something bigger? And this is where I think Frida and Vanessa, and in fact everybody here, we're asking this question: how does one move out the productivity? How does one increase the scale? Not just productivity, but the scale as well. These are the two kind of issues that I think. I'm going to Frida, and Frida's ready to fire away.
All right. One of the things that I've noticed women like to do, especially in Africa, is to come together and share their resources. So like we simply say in Africa that a child is brought up by the village, and so also a business can be brought up by the village. Women are always together in groups. They do things together. So we are finding that when we create communities, then they're better able to support each other. And this support comes through one, they put their resources together, their products together. And then that automatically increases their volume. That gives them access to non-traditional capital where they can get more products or produce in.
Okay.
All right.
Now this is cold. This is very cold. I'm sorry. Somebody has their mic on in the audience. Vanessa, would you like to add something to this? So scale and productivity, going beyond the sense of communality. What else can we do to help with scale and productivity?
I think scale builds on what Frida was describing. There are ways in which, and countries in which, and supply chains in which cooperatives are working very well, as Marie described in the shea cooperatives that have been structured today. And usually they're structured around an asset like a warehouse or a buyer or a supplier. I think what happened historically was structuring cooperatives without an asset and without a market, and that created a lack of sustainability and some unnecessary issues. We spent many years supporting cooperatives, for example, in coffee in Ethiopia, or even in consolidating and selling collecting maize to meet global standards of aflatoxin and moisture content, or in a very important example, increasing productivity, is improved seeds. And so in order to buy improved seeds and get appropriate fertilizers, actually with reduced costs, you need a collective bargaining or kind of a larger purchasing agreement. And so cooperatives who can come in, purchase a larger quantity, store and distribute to a greater number of farmers brings the cost down, of the seeds and the fertilizer, which then increases productivity and reduces cost at the same time and creates the scale. And so, but that requires governance, it requires oversight, it requires accounting tools. And I just wanted to layer one element here. The World Bank Gender Innovation Lab, if you haven't looked it up, you should. There's a few people online asking questions about research. World Bank Gender Innovation Lab has done phenomenal amount of research on women in business and women in Africa as compared to different kinds of environments and non-traditional sectors compared to traditional sectors. And one of the findings on the program we did in Ethiopia called the Women Agribusiness Leadership Network was there's a layering effect that with 1,200 women who received training, networking, and marketing, all the kinds of great work that Marie described or that Frida is doing through the We Connect platform, those have to be done in conjunction with markets, access to finance, building capacity, and that then brings that increased confidence and decision making. But any one of those pieces in isolation really doesn't sustain. It doesn't actually scale. And I think that's what that you've seen this, and I'm sure that Nugan has seen this as well. Great initiatives at a pilot level where 5,000 women benefit, but it's a whole nother thing to see 50 million women benefit and scale and sustain and engage. And so the Ethiopian government used to tell me they're tired of pilots. They don't want to hear anything more about pilots. And I love that. I learned from them. And I heard the same thing at Agra. We don't want to do anything that doesn't scale. Agra is about changing the food system landscape, but that means that has to change for young women just as much as it does for the older men who have been farming their whole lives.
Yeah, and I think this is it is one of the reasons why I this is such an important topic, because there are two issues. One is the kind of, and I think we're going to come to this conversation, is why are women excluded more in certain societies than others? And again, this is something I'm going to ask Nugun about, because I know I grew up in Nigeria. For those of you who don't know this, and northern Nigeria in particular, where women tend to be excluded from many economic activities. So it's a cultural thing, and I know that we are speaking about Africa, but as we also know, there's so much variety across the continent, not just in terms of women participation, but the reasons that underlie the absence or the engagement of women in certain areas. So I mean, there's massive cultural differences, and of course, demographic issues. Again, I see Frida kind of getting ready to fire away. So I'm going to turn to you. Perhaps you can say something about this. I mean, I'd like to know. I think our audience would like to know about the variety, that I was not aware of until now. Frida.
All righty. So one of the things that I find interesting is organizations that are supporting women today, they have great ideas. They have big, great ideas. I like what Vanessa says, that they're not going to touch anything that won't scale. But I grew up with an entrepreneurial mother, and really there's nothing new under the sun. My mom was a woman-owned business. She didn't go to school, but she was able to scale and help many more women in the village in very simple terms. Sometimes I say we put too much grammar. In Kenya, there's something, so we put too much grammar in this thing. We just need to keep things simple. My mom wanted to help people in her village to make money and to get them to teach their children and stuff like that. So when she got a contract in Nairobi, the city, and she was able to take pots and baskets to an American who was going to export it. Of course, she could not have enough, and the American asked her, "Can you make more? Do you have larger volumes?" So instead of trying to get larger volumes on her own, she went back to the village, got other women to making the basket, showed them, the standard quality, and she would take them to the city. This American would take it to America. There was economic development in the village just because of one woman who didn't go to school. Now we have so many people who've gone to school. We are complicating matters with all this academic jargon, in my opinion. Life is very simple. The banks are not able to give SMEs money because they're saying that they are too risky, especially in Kenya, where they don't want to follow non-traditional ways. The interests are high. So women are coming together. The little they sell, they're putting it together in their mobile phones. And as they put it together in their mobile phones, what are they doing? They're now having more money. They revolve that money. They have a revolving fund on their own without
Yeah.
any bank. They're working on trust. They're borrowing money and they're
Yeah.
moving on. While I appreciate education and technology and all that, it needs to make sense for that woman who is at the grassroots. Otherwise, they're only going to be scaling the people who are educated and look like us. We are not going to get the job done in very simple terms. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you. I would clap for you, but we don't want, and we will end up spending half the time clapping. So, take my word for it. I'm clapping for you in my mind. Now, I want to bring up back to the cultural variation here because we've seen the same thing happen with microcredit, for instance. And what you're describing is, in fact, what we have seen started in Bangladesh with the microcredit thing, and it caught on in some places. It caught on in East Africa. It's caught on Southern Africa to some. West Africa, it hasn't caught on. And we have a different reaction, and this is where maybe I know Marie, the shea butter thing is much of a West African phenomenon. To what extent, and I'm going to come to Nogun and to have a kind of a West African perspective on this. To what extent is this the patriarchy is much stronger in West Africa? This is my thought and my uneducated thought on this issue. Um, this is, men are holding you back type of thing. And how much of this is cultural, how much of this is in people's minds as opposed to reality. And, so let me start with, let me start with Nugun as the only man on the panel, speak up, be honest.
Thank you, Rajneesh. When I shared the leaflet for this webinar, someone did ask me, why do we have more men than women in the leaflet or so? Well, I just shrugged over it and laughed. But I think that was a very important question. And increasingly, I will say things are improving, especially in the northern part of Nigeria, where the issue of women mobility and visibility has been an issue, perhaps due to certain insecurities, or will I call it cultural norms per se. And what has happened over the years is the fact that women in those parts of the country are being relegated to the sort of household chores. I understand this is the case in certain areas where women are limited in terms of what they can contribute to at the household level. But increasingly, the narrative is changing. For example, some of the work we did in around the axis of Kano, Katsina, we could see that women that were not married tended to be more involved in the kind of activities we were doing. For example, single women, widowed women, and all that were very highly participative. They engaged in every activity. They were also involved more in agriculture than the other women that were married, as it were. Now, for me, that was a significant finding. And what was the reason? Because they had that autonomy, I will say. They had the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. But in situations where women are in a marriage kind of arrangement, certain back and forth has to happen. There has to be a high level of decision making for the husbands to agree to allow the women to attend group activities, or even to allow them to start some agric activities. And one of the things we tried to do in one of the projects we did was to say, okay, the women are not going beyond the home. Can we establish a backyard farm for the women so that the men can encourage them to work within that environment so that they are not seen outside? as the culture or some of those norms sort of limited the women to participate more externally. So, and when we trialed some of those activities, we saw how it sort of brought some light and excitement to the women. And when we came back after about a year or two to look at how those projects were going on, how the women were faring, it was exciting to see that the men were even the ones contributing to support the women in watering some of those vegetable gardens because they saw the benefits of those. And financing was an issue, but just like Frida and Vanessa did allude to, they had their own local mechanisms of accessing funding, where they could do some contributions. In certain cases, there are local money lenders. However, the money lending came with a very high interest rate, but it was something that we saw that was working. And to me, that was really fascinating. And just to shift a bit from that as well, I think increasingly as well, there is a shift where some of the young women that are now going to school, coming out of the university without jobs, are beginning to forge paths for themselves as well, right? I've seen the likes of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, the Agra as well, where they have programs where they support competitive women and other men as well to come up with scalable business ideas where they produce highly valued products that can fit into the supply chain. So I will say these norms are changing, but with more awareness, more can be done, and women can be seen to be more visible and more um, productive in the economy, I would say.
Let me turn to, I want to come back to the issue of credit, because credit, of course, one of the topics that I've learned about in this process is about land rights and about credit. I want to come back to that later on. So I'm kind of foreshadowing my own, and I know you're already taking me in that direction, Nugun. But I want to come back to now to Marie, to again West African experience, women's cooperatives, creating. How does that work? Is there a different experience? What Nugun is describing is how do you relate, or how do you see that in your experience?
Okay. Thank you, Prof. So I think for us at the Global She Alliance, our approach is quite similar to what Nugun has described with the vegetable garden, in the sense that we are working within existing social structure and within existing power structure to create change and to empower women in She. For us, what has worked really well to be able to do this change is that the cooperative structure is something that is very inclusive. And it's something that benefits when the cooperative benefits and gets more income. It's not like an individual household that will benefit. It's really the entire community that benefits. And so this is something that whenever we establish a cooperative or whenever we enter a community, this is something that we really stress to traditional leaders upon community engagement, and this is something that they can view. So with this collective empowerment model, we have been able to lift traditional barriers that women face, whether it's access to land, access to community, even just agency and voice in the community. We have been able to go around that and to have them collectively access infrastructure like warehouse that Vanessa was mentioning. We have been able to help them access land, or being able to have a voice on how land is managed. We've been able to help them get credit also, and without creating new conflict within the community, which I think is really key.
So I think the barriers to female entrepreneurship, in part, obviously, the patriarchy, which we realize, and I apologize on behalf of all men. Let me just add that. I really think that we, kind of, it's also the similar. I mean, to a lesser extent, one sees this in almost every continent, and I think this is one of those ongoing challenges of. But I think it reminds me a little bit of the discussion of Duflo and Banerjee, who got the Nobel Prize a few years ago, and the idea that when you empower people and when you give them the freedom to and and they see that there is a return or there's an opportunity for them that improves their life, that improves other. That by improving the cooperative or the community, you improve individual lives. Let them see that acting on their own is actually it's better to act in a group, which is more effective. So I think the cooperative thing is really, really an important issue. Having said that, there is also the challenge of having power, because in the unequal relationship between men and women, which is really underlying a lot of these problems. I know that earlier on, Vanessa and Nugun were all, the conversation came to land rights and tenure security, which comes into credit. So I want to go into this step by step. I want to talk about land rights and tenure security, which is really, and I don't want to summarize because I have some notes here. I'm not able to remember everything, but some of this discussion is about customary laws, and again, it comes to a cultural thing. Perhaps maybe we can get each of you to talk about this from your individual perspectives, industry-wise and region-wise. And instead of me explaining this, let's go through cycle through this process. Frida, let's start with Frida.
Okay, when it comes to land rights, give me 1 second. There's some noise coming through here. Sorry about that. When it comes to land rights, one of the things that I've noticed, it really, of course, it's deeply rooted in culture and how ownership is done in Africa. But now more and more, because of religion coming into play, then there are people who are saying that both boys and girls should be given equal rights to what their parents own. So there's some changes around that. And also with governments, there has been some change in before you use the property that both partners own, you need to get consent from the other. Of course, it's slow, but it's coming along. And then one thing that I've also realized, women, I don't know how to put this, but I'll just put it. One thing about women, because of the culture where we are at, there's just this sense of the man is higher than the woman. So once you get married, some women just give up their life to the man. He's the one who takes care of the finances. So as we educate women to run their businesses, we should also educate and build their confidence and capacity that first they're a whole woman before they meet that man. So that is something that can help a business. But we are finding that there's a class I did, and when we did the legal aspect of the business, the woman was asked, who owns the business? And she would say, I do. But when we checked the legal, when we checked in, we asked everybody to go and check business registration services and get a CR12 to find out what part of the business they own. Prof, there were a number of women that almost left their husbands because many of them had signed a paper thinking they were signing 50-50. This is not land. This is just a business where she's working and her husband is working. The CR12 they discovered, the husband had put 99 and had given her 1%. The man is never there. She's the one that is running the business. So I even regretted asking people to get the CR12, but it started a conversation. Just because you're married to someone doesn't mean you sign your life away. Ask questions, get to know. And many spouses have passed away, of course, the man, and the woman has discovered that she doesn't own anything. And people pop up that say that they own, they own what this man had. So I think there is room for us, even as we empower the woman, we don't just talk about business, but we talk about life and these cultural nuances also that are very uncomfortable. And I liked what Nugun said. Either Nugun or Marie said that they do a training for both men and women. We should move where we can train the women, but we must also train the men, because the idea is to have equity. All right. So don't overtrain the woman that now she thinks she's better than the man, but let her know her place. Let the man know his place. Let us know together what can we do for the betterment of our community, for the betterment of generations to come. That's my piece in that, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, this is, kind of, I just want to kind of, again, for those of people like me who know less about this, the absence of property rights, the absence of rights, not just kind of, at least there's something happening, but customary rights, in traditional societies where the assumption is that the land is owned by the man. And that, so women, even if they want to borrow money, the banks will not give them money. Even if they are able to get through the process, they have no collateral. And I think this is one of those challenges. Which is there a solution to having absence of collateral? I mean, again, let's start with Vanessa. Maybe with a different perspective on this.
Okay, so I love Frida's examples about what people think is on paper and what's really on paper, because I think rights and laws are the same way. I did a huge study across West Africa on the implementation of ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, okay? So we're talking 15 countries who have trade agreements, and we surveyed people in the capital city who are overseeing, trade liberalization and trade laws. We surveyed people at the border, again, with the government, and then we surveyed private sector using the trade, okay? And the gap between what's on the paper and the laws, and then what people at the capital think are happening, and then what the users of the system and at the border, private sector implementers and the officials at the borders are saying is actually happening are all different. And so part of what we're talking about here is an oral culture, and a culture where people tend to believe what they hear and see more than what's on paper. And going to an environment where you're referring back to contract law, you're referring to asset management, you're referring to audit-based financing, and you're referring to customary rights versus legal rights. But one country who's really tried to reform this and reform the thinking as well as the laws was Rwanda, right? In terms of mandating equal representation of women in parliamentary seats. I think they got to 50-50 of both ministers and parliamentarians in Rwanda. There was another survey in Ghana about entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, ranking by, I believe it was the WEF at the time, probably 10 years ago. Ghana was ranked 5th in the world for women entrepreneurs in terms of rights. And someone in the audience chat was saying, okay, is it just women in Africa or is this global issues? I really appreciate that question. My sister is a woman entrepreneur in the US, right? She's had every kind of challenge where banks didn't want to lend to her. I was the bank for a while. She couldn't get loans to run her business, and then she could, so I think some of these issues they're not necessarily Africa uniquely. It's about being an entrepreneur is difficult wherever you are. Being a farmer is a horrifically difficult job wherever you are. But there are barriers, and they're not just cultural barriers. They're traditional ways of doing business, and then regulatory and legal barriers. We're trying to find, for example, now we're moving into carbon credit, right? We need to get carbon credits. We need to reduce our carbon emissions. We need to use land efficiently so that we don't continue to increase, the greenhouse gases. And so using, land inefficiently is actually contributing to climate change, and people don't necessarily realize that. So now, if you can get a carbon credit for keeping carbon in the soil or counting trees, planting trees and things like that, then you should be able to get credit for, doing the right behavior. And yet, if you don't have a land right and land title, you can't get carbon credit. You can't even do carbon trading. And this is, there are global norms which cannot be applied. So there are differences globally in terms of equity. Nobody in the US would challenge you to have the rights to your own business as a woman. You don't need your husband to sign on your land title or your banking account in Europe, but you do in some countries in Africa still. In Mali, if you get a divorce, you can lose the right to your children, let alone to your land. So there's some countries where you have incredibly still not just norms, but incredibly inequitable practices. And in other countries, and I think this is something that you were trying to say, Rwanda or other countries, in Kenya, you have incredibly powerful women entrepreneurs and incredible access to finance tools and technologies and resources. So then we're not talking about a monolithic environment in any way, shape, or form. And I even was thinking we need a table where you could really see the variables changing as you look at different regions and countries and trade corridors and even crop areas.
Yeah. This is really an important issue, and I think we're going to dwell on this a bit. Marie, I was reading one of the reports of the Alliance, and I also read about how the trees belonged to the men, so to speak, and then they kind of arbitrarily chop them down or whatever because they're not seen as something. So I mean, the experience there kind of relates to this conversation that one is that women are dependent upon on the men. Now, where I want to go to, just I'm again foreshadowing my movement, is the issue of capital, because we're coming to being in the supply chain requires capital. Remaining in the supply chain requires capital. Going up the supply chain requires capital. This is not the old days where you go dig a hole in the ground, plant a tree, things pop up, and you go to the local market. Those days are gone. How do we move things forward? Capital, capital, capital. And it's not only capital in terms of finance, but capital in terms of knowledge. I see Romy in the chat function has brought this up as well. But first, I want to tell me about the Shea Butter Alliance and this issue of annoying men and the patriarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll start with the land and then I'll try to get a bit to the credit part. So in terms of the land, yes, absolutely. Because in most cases, men own the land and trees are really associated, at least in West Africa, to a claim of ownership. Women are not able to make any decision related to the tree. And it goes beyond whether to cut them or keep them alive, but it can also be, whether to do like maintenance, like pruning, so that the tree doesn't have parasites and can still deliver shea fruits. So it's a huge constraint, because in effect, women are not able to control their supply on which they depend. The way that we are approaching it is twofold. First, a lot of awareness and sensitization at the community level for both the women and the men, and showing, the concrete benefits that shea trees and shea have brought. So, for example, one of the major use of shea income is actually for agriculture. It's used to purchase the farm inputs. So really making the case as to how the trees contribute to the community. And then what we are also looking to do is how to enable women to participate into land management decision without necessarily them having a claim of ownership, because ownership is land tenures, as everyone knows, is a very complicated, complex, and long-standing issue. And so the way we approach this woman being able to have a say as to whether a tree is cut or no is through a framework that we called local bylaws. And it's basically a community going together, identifying a specific parkland area in which shea trees grows, but there is also other activities like charcoal happening, beekeeping, livestock rearing, and so on, and putting all of the different stakeholders together. So the woman and then the men and the farmers and the livestock herders and so on, and so that they together can decide on a management framework. What are the rules to cut a tree? If you are cutting a tree, do you need to plant a new one? Or and so that little by little, they can reclaim some decision-making power into what is a major part of their livelihoods. Yeah, I'll stop there, and maybe I will address credit in the next a bit.
I think this is a very interesting perspective. I saw one of the things that strikes me is the provision of, we talked about infrastructure at the beginning, but we also talk about extension services. We haven't really put any discussion into that. And I read somewhere that extension services, women tend to have lesser access to extension services. That when they come around offering to train workers and so forth, or farmers, and teach them new techniques, they ignore the women. There's a gender bias in extension services, and so on. And I think this is also something that, coming back to training, and again, Frida's point of the cooperative matters here. But I think all of these issues are coming, they're all connected. I mean, we're not going to solve this problem in an hour and a half. I think more we are kind of create some awareness. But at the end of the day, women are seen as by banks and lenders, even that they're higher risk. The perceived risk is higher, and they charge them more for loans than they do men. Um, I think this is really. I mean, I don't know. This is what I've read. Nugun, let's you mentioned high interest rates. How does one create? How does one address this? Let's start thinking about solutions. Is there some way of, and in the Nigerian context or West, whatever your experience, what is the way around this?
So thanks, Rajneesh. Maybe going back to the Grameen Bank's kind of example, where a lot was done around social capital. And I think it's a very fascinating idea, where the lending for the next person depends on the ability of one of the group members to fulfill their own social responsibility, so to say. So when we have arrangements where certain grants are made available, and that sort of peer pressure makes you to succeed as an entrepreneur, I think it helps in making the capital to go around at a very low interest rate, for example. So I will say that could be a very viable option. Then in terms of collateral, I think over the years, significant land reform has happened in places like Ethiopia, uh, where there were clamors for land redistribution from what obtained in the past. And I think when I was working there, I came across one of the World Bank's, should I say, regenerative projects, where they try to do a sustainable land management project. And as part of that project, the land that was going to be recovered was to be redistributed. And one of the criteria was that the men and women in a household are going to be registered as co-owners in terms of the title. So potentially that could be a source of collateral for women to be able to use as a means of securing credit. And in addition to that as well, what in Nigeria we found out as well was the fact that when we did train, coming back to also the issue of the training of both men and women, and that has held so much benefit, where the men were educated around how women can help in contributing to the family's food security. So that sort of support could come when everybody within the family understands what the other person's contribution can mean to the entire family, as it were. So hopefully, going forward, we'll begin to see the whole land redistribution programs or family-oriented kind of laws allow that everybody within the family, both male and female, should have access to land so that they can use the land for other productive purposes, having access to capital and all that in the future.
Frida, I know you were looking eager earlier on. Fire away.
Yeah, because I'm a woman entrepreneur, so I get passionate about this stuff. So I'm not just talking to help them, I'm also talking to help myself. But something I've noticed in Kenya is that more banks are coming up with products for women because they say, I don't have the statistic, no good, please forgive me. Maybe the next time I meet you, I'll have the statistics. However, they're coming up with products for women because they say that women are found to be better payers. They pay their loans better and faster. So we are finding that the AGF, Africa Guarantee Fund, has a guarantee for supporting SMEs and special ones for women. And then we're also finding banks are giving unsecured loans, and the unsecured loans are based on their cash flows, how much money they're making. And then also they're lending money to groups. Because groups, they find that women are coming together in groups and revolving their own money, but the money they have is not enough for everything they need to do. But because these women already have a community and a trust structure in place, they're less risky, so they're given money. They're given money as a group. So we're seeing that more and more here in Kenya.
Thank you. One of the before I come to Marie, one of the things that struck me, I was talking to a friend of mine who was running a training course for women cocoa farmers in Ghana, and they ran this training course, and I'm kind of obviously one of the things that teaching people about managing money and finances is an important thing. So it was World Bank program, and they all were taught how to do this, how to open a bank account, how to utilize the benefits of having a bank account. They ran this course, everyone did the exam, they even paid people to take part so that, and what they did was they paid them at the end of the course. And the idea was that they would deposit the money in their newly opened bank account. So they would then utilize this as a credit system. And she told me that 99 out of 100, it wasn't specific about the numbers, of people withdrew the money as soon as it came out in its entirety and put it back underneath their mattress. So the whole point of teaching them how to use a bank account and how to get out of the informal sector, and Rafida is shaking her head. So, and I was like, come on, we are doing, what more can you do? And I just tell this as an anecdote, but it is one of those issues. Vanessa, please.
Yeah, no, I love the story, and there's counterpoint, back and forth on both sides of these questions, many cases. But one of the areas of variation has to do with the change that's happened since COVID on appreciation for digital technology. It's not that the technologies were new during COVID, it's that people all of a sudden had to use technology because in rural areas, because you couldn't, so it's very expensive to open a bank close to farming areas. And I tried, I funded banks to actually expand in Ethiopia to get closer to the farming areas so that people would use financial services. But that's a very costly means of going about it. Whereas if you trust digital technology and you will use banking and the bank can see you using digital, tools, then they can be lending you money based on your turnover rather than based on asset-based financing. But I really didn't see an uptake of those technologies until people had to, and they couldn't physically get to wherever their money or their product or whatever was. So I think that that story might have taken place pre-COVID, and you might want to go back and check if they did post-COVID comparators. Just to see, but that was one thing I think that I understood as well on mobile money is that initially in some countries when mobile money was rolled out, you would have to go to a physical location to withdraw your mobile money into cash, and people would still be converting mobile money to cash at physical locations. Whereas in other countries, the amount of transactions you could do was raised. Again, even in Kenya, previously you could only transact a very limited amount per day using mobile money. And during COVID, they lifted those restrictions and people started using the technology so much more even. So again, some of the limitations are cost of delivering cash versus, you know, using digital tools and technologies. You can't use a credit card if you want to buy a bag of tomatoes in the market, right? So what are your solutions? If you can't, and if you still are using, you know, like a very simple phone, then you can't be having to rely on so many apps and things like that. And the cost of technology is still too high. You're paying for, you know, the data and all this other stuff. Anyway, I'm very hopeful despite being very contradictory and saying that there's so many challenges, because I think, as Frida said, there's a lot of innovations. As Marie said, there's a lot of solutions happening in pockets in the field. And part of what I hear on a regular basis when I'm outside of Africa is we don't understand and we don't know what's happening. A lack of information, a lack of visibility, and a lack of transparency. So some people have been asking, like, what do we do? For me, it's a lot about communicating. There's a fear of talking about money in businesses in Africa because you think you're going to have to pay more taxes. And sometimes that's true. There's like a retribution effect. If people know you're making money, they come and want more money from you. They'll be like taxing you for extra tax, government tax, family tax. Everybody wants more if they see you making more. You know, it's true. So,
Yes.
you know, it costs you to be making money, then you have to pay out to everybody. So, but without telling people that you're actually making money, then no one else thinks anyone's making any money and they don't want to invest more. So there's a backlash from not being more transparent and having lists of businesses and all of that. So I just wanted to factor some of that in. I've been really enjoying this conversation. It's wonderful, and I'm going to have to sign off pretty soon. So thank you very much.
I really appreciate Vanessa joining, and you know, kind of she's the brains behind this event. If I hadn't met her, this wouldn't be happening. So thank you so much, and I'm really glad you could join us. I'm going to move to a topic that Vanessa kind of brought up, and she's may not be able to contribute on directly, was understanding markets, and that, you know, that training female entrepreneurs not just to manage money, to borrow money, but also in terms of understanding where to sell, how to be efficient about making money. And this is one of those, you know, kind of lessons. And I mean, again, all of you have dealt with this on the ground. Let me start with Marie on this. Understanding markets. What are your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely agree that it is key. And I think it's also really key to understand where you are positioning within the market. So for example, if we look at the shea value chain, depending on what product you produce, your market will be different. So for example, a cooperative selling shea butter would be looking for sale either like to the national, international market, but mostly on the cosmetic side of the value chain. Whether, for example, a cooperative who is doing shea kernel, so one processing step before, would be looking at the entire ecosystem who is involved both in food and in cosmetic. And so this understanding where to whom you sell and for which market is really important, because you will have very different dynamic at play. So for example, because most of the shea butter is actually used in the confectionery industry, you have a very, the price of shea follows the same trend than the price of cocoa butter. So you have a lot beyond, you know, the harvest of shea and the quality of shea and so on. You have a lot of external factors influencing markets. So how do we convert this for women cooperative? I think it's really in two steps. So the first step is really helping them, supporting them understanding the value chain context and where they fit them. And then the second step is about helping them access this market information. Helping them know, what are the common prices, what are the different contracting terms, and so on and so on. And for that, we do it at two levels. First, we do it through like just traditional face-to-face training in business management, contract negotiation, costing, profit. But then the second part, which I think is really important, is we help them access this information. And we help them access this information by linking them to a lot of buyers so that they don't negotiate with only one, but they have option to access other off-takers. We have also worked in partnership with other organizations that provide pricing information that were disseminated either like through radio program, text message, automated voicemail. So really the idea is for them to get as many sources of information as possible so that they can judge whether the price that is put them is right or not. And actually, we recently did a survey on one of our projects in Togo and Burkina Faso, and it works. We've seen that most of I think 90% of the cooperative were actually deciding between themselves on the prices that they wanted to sell their shea kernel before, and not just agreeing to whatever the buyer was offering them.
Frida.
What we do is first because we have buyers and we have suppliers. So the first thing we do is we analyze the corporate procurement priorities across industries, supplier diversity goals, and ESG targets to align the women-owned businesses with the real-time sourcing opportunities. So the buyer tells us what they're looking for, and then we align them with the women-owned business. And in our women-owned business ecosystem, we assess the capacity, the growth stage of the woman, and the challenges she's facing, so that we design a training and coaching that is suitable for her. So we are not just training and coaching them in a vacuum, but they're being trained and coached based on the buyer's needs. So once they are ready, the buyer is also ready, the connection happens. We also look at, we map the enabling environment that they're in to ensure that they have what they need in terms of compliance. So one of the things that corporates struggle with is that small business owners are risky because they are not compliant. But our registration and certification process ensures that these are suppliers who have been verified. If they're ready, they go through a certification process. So this gives the buyer, and to say, more peace of mind. And this is across 135 countries, 135 markets. It's almost like a guaranteed market.
Okay. Nugun, I know you've done several of these training ideas, but particularly what markets?
Okay, so in terms of market, what we tend to do is to understand the requirements of the market, obviously, and to prepare the local farmers, even from the production level, the quality of the kind of seeds. Certainly, you don't prepare a group of farmers with their local seeds to target a well-functioning and competitive market. So from the seed selection process, we try to understand in terms of quality what is required, and then how can these farmers meet up with these standards. So they are trained along those lines, and to ensure that from the production stage to the harvesting and also to the storage, they're able to store these products in a very efficient manner, such that they're able to meet the market requirements. And in terms of quantities, also the group approach, just like the other speakers have spoken about, really works well when you have farmers in a cooperative setting where they are trained on the same standards, and we're able to see how there's a central point for collection of these products. So it makes it easier for them to be able to have a better bargaining power, to be able to sell to the most competitive market, as it were.
So do we have any, I mean, one of the things I was reading about in India, people have developed apps to, you know, give farmers and fishermen a kind of real-time information about the differences in pricing. I think Nugun, you were telling me at one point in time that telling people to store their outputs and not sell it immediately at during the harvest season, they will get a better price if they stored it. They had better storage facilities, and then um, they could sell it later on at a higher price. And knowing this and this information, maybe am I wrong? Do you not tell me the story about?
No, absolutely, and that is what the should I say, the middlemen thrive on. So you see in local markets, because farmers are always eager to sell their produce to solve other family related challenges, the middlemen are always well positioned to take off from these farmers. The likes of FX, I don't know if anyone is conversant with FX that works in Nigeria and some other parts of Africa. So what they try to do is they try to break that ground where middlemen come to take advantage of farmers by providing storage facilities and also improved seeds for these farmers. And they give them the option of storing with them. And when the markets have better prices, say 3-4 months after harvest, when um, a lot of the food in the market is has appreciated in price, that is when FX bring these farmers produce out to ask them, are you happy to sell to other people, or you want to sell to us as one of your partners, as it were? So FX gives them that opportunity to store with them. They also support them with input through a sort of an arrangement where they can have a mutually beneficial kind of relationship, where they add more value to farmers in terms of market advantage by storing their produce with them over a long time, and also to certain extent giving them cash advance to solve some related family problems. So that seemed to be a very useful approach that has helped in the past as well.
Oh, this is a very interesting set of ideas. You know, I think, you know, I mean, I'm certainly learning a lot of things now. You know, as always, we tend to run out of time as we get to the more interesting questions. And I'm aware that people want to have their dinner. In some cases, they have to cook it, like myself. Um, um, so yeah, so I'm going to try and be punctual and not keep anyone longer. But the conversation I want to have and I want us to end on is moving up the value chain. And you know, this is I mean, I've heard issues with there are challenges in this. So, you know, on the one hand, we are struggling with staying in even at the bottom of the value chain, but there are certainly opportunities for moving up the value chain, and there have been companies and women entrepreneurs have moved up the value chain. So I think I start with I know that Frida has some examples of cosmetics. That's what Vanessa told me. She keeps nothing to herself. Let's start with Frida on cosmetics and moving up the value chain. And I know Marie will say something on this as well.
Oh, fantastic. So moving up the value chain is simply helping the women to engage in value addition. We have some women who have been in fruits, and what they're doing now is drying the fruits and having them as snacks, and they're selling those in the supermarkets. There's even one lady who is exporting it already because they're having them packaged properly, going through the appropriate standards with KEBS here in Kenya and getting that sold. And also when it comes to cosmetics, there's shea butter. There's a lot of oils that they're processing and out of avocado, moringa. Those are the two that come top of mind, and they're creating oils. They're creating teas. They're creating different kinds of wellness products that are not just being used in Kenya, but are also getting exported right now. So value addition, moving from production to processing, is one of the key roles of supporting women to move up the supply chain.
Marie.
I think that Frida said it perfectly. So I fully agree with the value addition part. I think in addition to add a bit to other ways that women businesses can move up the value chain, I think you have to look at things like productivity. How can you, which is sometimes an overlooked way of women cooperative or women SMEs to significantly increase their income. And I will give a very simple example. Shea is traditionally harvested by walking. Women walk very long distance to collect shea fruits and then walk back very long distance to carry the fruits for further processing. What we have found is with something very simple, like providing them with a tricycle for transport, their productivity has increased by 50%. So suddenly they are able to sell 50% more shea. And in addition, they can also use the tricycle to do to realize other income in the off season. And then I think the last also opportunity for women cooperative to move up the value chain would also be looking at others' value chain. And this is especially true in a seasonal value chain like shea, whether you collect shea from June till August, September, then you process it into butter, maybe up until January, February, and then you have months in which you don't have any shea either to collect or to process. So how can you use your infrastructure? The fact that you are registered as a cooperative, the fact that you maybe have a warehouse, maybe you have a bank account, maybe you have money from a buyer to also launch other businesses into other value chain and to really start being like a multi-income generation cooperative.
This is really interesting. Nugun, I know you have some other experiences I think you mentioned cassava as well. Moving up the value chain. I know that in Nigeria there are lots of people trying to move up the value chain in this regard. But when talking about women entrepreneurs, what is your experience? What are the challenges or what are the opportunities?
Thank you, Rajneesh. So in terms of the challenges, obviously, is the issue of access to information and knowledge, right? We understand when we look at where the demographics, where the sort of women entrepreneurs are we talking about the ones at the subsistence level? So there has to be that deliberate effort to move from thinking from the subsistence perspective to value addition. So how can women be educated, be trained to be able to produce commodities or products that are fit for the sort of high value end market? And that can only happen when the thinking is shifted from just farming for subsistence and local market sales, but rather farming from the start of the production process, aiming for the high valued market, training them with the right kind of knowledge, information on how to access the market, and credit to be able to meet the requirements also in terms of standards for the high end market that we're talking about.
Okay. No, this we're just actually opening a whole area which I want to spend another hour, but alas, this is not going to happen. I wanted to talk about seed companies. I wanted to talk about transport and logistics. I wanted to talk about investment funds. I wanted to talk about how to address the equity and equity gaps in terms of men working on valuing the work of women equally to men. These are all issues that really, and alas, time is running out, and I will not going to live up to the Nigerian stereotype of doing African time. So I will. No, I want to just say that we are going to do a part two for sure, And for those of you in the audience who want to participate, please remember us. We'll do this as it says in our strap line. You know, this is Dunning Africa Center is a place for conversation. It's not a physical place per se. It's where we come to meet, to think, to engage. So you know, and I want us to all engage again. So remember, come and visit us again. And thank you to our participants, Frida, Marie, Nugun, and Vanessa, who had to leave a little bit early. We're delighted to be here. Thank you so much for helping us with this event. And yeah, see you soon at our next Dunning Africa webinar.
The Dunning Africa Center. It's not a place, it's a continent-wide conversation. Join us as we ask the pressing questions facing African business today.